Hear these words from Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Luke Stair, and I am the pastor of students and spiritual formation here at Brewster Baptist Church. And normally at this hour, I'm teaching high school Sunday school, and part of me is a little sad that I'm not with them this morning. They're going to be having a really interesting discussion. But that may be why you're not used to seeing me around at this hour. I'm also the last pastor here to share my story. Some of you here are older than me by at least a few years, but my hope and prayer is that God will still speak through me and through my life, and that in some way it will be an encouragement or challenge to you. Let me also say this. Like many other people in my generation, I find titles to be odd and weird and uncomfortable, especially when they're applied to ourselves. So it's always something that catches me off guard or makes me a little uneasy when someone calls me pastor, even if that's what I am and it's what my job is. And maybe it's because I'm part of the second least religious generation in our country, and the students I work with are the least religious. But when people find out I'm a pastor, or they call me one, it just creates a little bit of separation or distance or elevation that I don't really care for. It's a separation or a title that for most of my life I never anticipated taking on. And I hope that by hearing my story and Barbara's, David's, and Doug's stories, that you've learned maybe we're not so different from you. The separation, elevation, or distance isn't really there at all. We're not spiritual superstars who've got it all figured out or have special favor with God. In fact, as Baptists, we believe that everyone here has the same amount of access and favor with God. And I hope that by hearing about my life and my journey, you'll begin to reflect on your own story and see where God has intersected with your own life. In my life, following God and learning to trust Him, even as we venture into the unknown, has been a major theme. I grew up in the church, and that may be an experience some of you here share. My dad was and still is a minister. Now, as a child, I hated going to church. It was the last place I wanted to be most of the time, especially on Sunday mornings, because I didn't like going to worship services. And I felt like I was at church all the time. Most mornings I would attempt to convince my parents that I was sick and that I needed to stay home, but it never worked. One time, though, I actually was sick, but because I had pretended and lied so many times, my parents didn't believe me, and they dragged me to church anyway. I promptly lost my cookies, so to say, on a pew near the front during the middle of a worship service that fateful morning. My mom, to spare anyone else the unsightly mess, threw my older brother's jacket on top of it, ushered me out of the sanctuary, and left my brother alone on the pew sitting next to the mess. He jokes that he still has not forgiven us. All of that dragging to church really paid off, though. I learned about Jesus, and I knew that I was loved and cared for, and I wanted, as much as any child can, to follow Jesus. I can't think of a time in my life when I didn't know about Jesus or didn't want to follow him or trust in him. And so I like to think of faith in my life using the metaphor of light. It's not like some light switch got turned on and what was once in absolute darkness is now covered in light, but it's been more like a sunrise. There's this ever-growing awareness of the light of Christ in my life. Sometimes clouds come and obscure that light, but for the most part, that light and the awareness of it is something that grows steadily in me day by day. Now, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but 2 weeks after I was born, my parents packed up and moved to northern Alabama to a town called Hartselle, where my dad ministered and my mom taught public school. My first memories are of Alabama and of growing up there, and that's a photo of my brother and my dad and I. It really was a wonderful childhood. And when I was 8, my parents sat my brother Jake and I down for a family meeting, which was really weird because we just didn't have those. They told us that they thought God was calling them to go serve at a church in Missouri. And I think that's the first time I ever heard anyone really talk about wanting to follow God and what God had for their lives. We moved to Missouri a few months later, and it was really hard. The kids there made fun of my southern accent, which was quite pronounced after learning to speak in the Deep South. To put it this way, I do not sound now like what I sounded like then. Moving was really hard for me, but I adapted and made new friends. Growing up in Missouri was wonderful. I had a great group of friends through high school, and that's a picture of us after our senior year. And we've managed to stay connected over the years and despite the various distances between us. My parents were and continue to be great examples of what it means to follow Jesus and to trust him. They've done this in their moves from Missouri to Alabama to Missouri again and onward to Texas. They've done this in the way that they've opened up their home and hospitality to people from all over the world. A Japanese exchange student who lived with us for a year, a German surgeon who my dad met as a high school student who came to live with us while she shadowed a doctor in the U.S., and many others. They treat people with kindness and dignity, and they work to make the world a better place. They love people fully and deeply and without hesitation. They have modeled obedience and faithfulness in the way of Jesus for me, and I know that it has not always been an easy road for them to walk. Life kind of plodded along and was normal for me until high school, at which point I started to feel like God was calling me to be a missionary. And I'm thankful that I had great mentors and adults in my life who wanted to talk with me through those feelings. They helped me figure them out and explore them. They encouraged me and spurred me on and gave me a chance to test that out by taking me on mission trips all over the country and to the country of El Salvador several times. I began to learn about cultural differences and began to see God working in unexpected places. And when it came time for me to look at colleges, I wanted to go to a Christian university where I could prepare to become a missionary. My plan was to study English education and take electives in some religion classes so that I could have marketable skills that would allow me entry into another country. I enrolled at Oklahoma Baptist, had a roommate, and was ready to go. Apparently, God had other plans. And as has been God's pattern in my life, he interrupted my plans and steered me in another direction. In this case, it was the direction I was avoiding and the one I definitely was not planning on going in. God did not audibly call down from the heavens when I planned to go to Oklahoma Baptist. An admissions counselor from Southwest Baptist University, the college in my hometown of Missouri, did. Now that town has roughly 10,000 people and 2 stoplights. I wanted out. But I'd been selected for a full tuition scholarship at SBU. Now I really want to give my parents a lot of credit here. They did not look at me and say, "You've got a full tuition scholarship, you're going, end of discussion." Instead, they congratulated me and did what might have been the hardest thing for both of us and said that I needed to pray and figure out what God was leading me to do. Their friends and our relatives thought that they were absolutely insane for allowing me the choice. It wasn't easy, but nothing will make you reconsider your priorities like a full tuition scholarship. So even though I desperately wanted out of that little town, I accepted SBU's offer and went, and I am so thankful I did. It has opened up so many doors for me. It's set me on the road that brought me to this point in time. And I wouldn't be who I am today without those experiences. Once I got to SBU and started studying, I realized that English education, specifically the education piece, was not for me. I was preparing for a life of trying to get 10th graders to care about Shakespeare, and I didn't even care about Shakespeare. It was the worst possible career I could imagine. So I had what might have been a panic attack one day at work and decided in that moment, very impulsively, to change my major. I dropped education but kept English because I'd already had so many classes in it, and added on a second major in religion and philosophy, a program in which I had not taken a single class. I ended up loving it, and it made me realize that there were other possibilities for me, and made me see that there might be other ways God could work in my life. While I was in college, another key experience was that I felt God calling me to go on a mission trip to central India that my university was offering. My parents were really hesitant. The trip's details were poorly planned, the leaders were very inexperienced, and my parents knew it would be rough. My dad had planned and executed international mission trips all over the world for the last decade, so I probably should have listened to their reservations, but I launched myself into the unknown and went to Bhopal. Unfortunately, I spent most of the trip sick inside the hotel room. I was miserable. I was so sick that I lost several pounds over the 2.5 weeks that we were there. It was especially disappointing because there was a girl on that trip that I really enjoyed spending time with. She was smart, funny, kind, and I thought she was really cute. We started dating shortly after we returned, and Kelsey and I have been together ever since. It was the biggest unexpected blessing of that time, and I have no doubts that the main reason God wanted me to go on that trip was so I could meet Kelsey. Going to India was an exercise in trust, and I'm glad that I followed God and went. As Kelsey and I continued to date and we got to the point of deciding whether or not we'd get married, it became really difficult to figure out what the next steps in our life would be and what they would look like. Deciding what to do after college was a crippling period of indecision for me. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I graduated a semester late thanks to my double major, so I had a little extra time to figure things out. I debated and went back and forth several times about whether or not I would go on to study teaching English as a foreign language, or if I would go to seminary. In the end, I realized that what I was passionate about was helping people grow deeper in their faith and knowing Jesus on a deeper level. So I wanted to go into that passion. I applied to Truett Seminary at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. There was a lot going on in my life at this time that made this really a very difficult decision. My senior year of college, my dad received news that the church where he'd been serving for the past 15 years was restructuring their positions. His position would be eliminated, and a pastor of discipleship position was going to be created. Because of the bylaws, they couldn't just slide him from one position to the other, though, so he'd have to apply like everyone else. And while they decided what they were going to do, they'd keep him on. My dad waited 8 months to find out that he did not get the job. All the while, people in the church didn't realize that his position was going away. They just thought the church was hiring an additional pastor, so they'd come up to my dad and say, "Oh, I told so-and-so to turn in their resume. You'll just love working with them." Not realizing that they were in fact turning in his competition's resumes. This was the church I grew up in, the church that I had been a part of all throughout college, had served at, had worked at as a janitor, and had taught me so much about following Jesus. It was a hard pill to swallow, and I went to church angry most Sundays. My parents ended up moving to a suburb of Austin, Texas, where my dad now serves at a church, in the summer between my senior year of college and my extra semester. I was angry at the church, and it was really difficult to be a part of it. It caused me to have some trust issues that made me want to steer clear of church work. And when I returned to college and my hometown from my summer working at camp, I visited other churches, but none of them felt right. I missed the youth I'd been volunteering with for the past 4 years. I missed the people at that church, but I was still mad and hurt. I went back to it though, and a lot of Sundays I sat there out of spite, giving people death stares and doing my best to let them know I was not happy with them. But I was there out of discipline, and I sat through most services dealing with my anger and my hurt. Even through all of this, I still felt that God was calling me to go to seminary. Everything pointed me that way, so I finished my application to Truett at Baylor. But I needed one final piece. My church had to recommend me, and my church's policy was that I had to get up on stage and share why I felt called to ministry and my journey of faith, and then they would recommend me. The Sunday morning where I had to share came just a few weeks before my December graduation, and honestly, I don't even think I wrote anything down before that speech. I tried several times, but everything felt disingenuous or it just wasn't right. So I got up and I shared with my church how thankful I was for their part in raising me and teaching me about Jesus. And then I talked about the role that my parents played, my dad especially, in that church, teaching people about Jesus and serving the community there. I talked about his years of service and what a gift that was, and I honored him as best as I could. And I think in that moment I was finally able to forgive those committees for the decisions that they'd made and the hurt that they'd caused, and I was finally able to move on. The weeks after that were a whirlwind of change. I graduated from college, and I left Bolivar, Missouri, behind for good. I proposed to Kelsey on New Year's Day of 2013, moved all of my earthly possessions into an apartment at the camp where I was working, since my parents decided not to take my things to Texas, and I started working full-time at a camp in Oklahoma while I waited to hear whether or not I would get into Truett. I need to elaborate on some details here. So, the apartment that I moved into was attached to the camp's gym and had originally been designed as a locker room. It was called the Can, and it was gross. I lived in it with 5 other guys. One of them was extremely messy, the others were moderately so. It smelled, was damp, and was infested with mice. 10 days after I moved into the Can, I walked inside on an unusually warm day in January. The Can was warmer than normal too. I noticed the smell was just a little off, but then again, I lived in a locker room with 5 guys. I heard what I thought were the mice scurrying around in the ceiling, knocking down insulation, as was their custom. I also heard what I thought was the furnace kicking on. But then the power clicked off, and the fire alarm started. And all of the pieces connected in my head. I was in a burning building, and the fire was raging over my head. I ran outside as fast as I could, only to see smoke pouring out of the roof. The building didn't stand a chance. It, along with everything I owned, except the clothes on my back, went up in smoke. And that door, right in front of the firefighter, is the door to the apartment where we lived. The following weeks were very difficult, as I waited for insurance money to come in so that I could begin to buy clothes and other things again. I lived off of donated goods, which graciously poured in. I struggled, though, because everything that was donated did not fit or wasn't to my taste, and I hated it. Being the object of charity is hard. It is a surefire way, pun intended, of getting your pride in check. Losing everything I had eliminated any sense of control I had over my own life, and I needed other people. I needed their help, and it was very difficult to accept that. I had to learn to trust that God would take care of me and my needs, and that He would do it through the community around me. I think if a lot of us were honest, we'd realize that we all long for control over our own lives. We want to play it safe and feel like we've got everything covered. My daughter is a few months old, over 1 year old, and I already see this pattern developing in her life. She fights for her independence, and she wants to do everything herself. And I do this in my own life, even to this day. I seek control, I'm hard-headed, and it's taken events like losing all of my possessions, which is a security after all, to make me begin to realize that I am not in control, nor should I try to be. Eventually, things settled down after the fire. We got into an intensely full schedule of work at the camp. I was accepted to Truett, and I was thrilled to go there. And after finishing my summer working at camp, Kelsey and I were married on August 17th, 2013. We didn't have time for a honeymoon because my seminary orientation and her work started the Tuesday after we were married. It was yet another whirlwind. We moved into a tiny house in a tiny town just outside of Waco into a senior adult couple's backyard. Their names were Dawn and Frosty Petty, and they were sweet as can be. We slowly adjusted to Texas and sweated as we moved there in the hottest month of the year. And our only working vehicle for several months did not have air conditioning. Everything about moving to Waco, from finding housing to finding jobs and finding friends, was a step of faith into the unknown. We had to follow where we thought God was leading us, and we had to trust that He was going to take care of our needs. I loved classes at the seminary. I got a job working at Baylor's Office of Spiritual Life, organizing and helping students plan and execute mission trips. Kelsey worked 2 part-time jobs, which were just okay. She was passionate about meeting real needs in the community of Waco, whose poverty rate is over double the national average. And she realized that the greatest need was for teachers who were going to care deeply for their students. So she started working on her teaching certification at the community college that spring. We really struggled in Waco that first year. We had a really difficult time finding friends and a place to belong, and we had our share of missteps along the way. And we might be the only people in this church who have ever been voted out of a small group. It made for excellent case studies when I took a class on small groups. I had the best ones. Things really changed for us the following spring, though. I got a new job within the Office of Spiritual Life as a resident chaplain, which meant that Kelsey and I moved into a dorm at Baylor University. We had an apartment, it wasn't a dorm room, don't worry. I worked alongside the hall director and the RAs in caring for the students in the building. I was there to be a pastor within the community and care for the spiritual and emotional needs. I didn't have to enforce rules or policies. I was just there to be with the students and care for them. Parts of this job were wonderful and amazing. I got to share some of life's greatest moments that come with college with these students. But I also got to walk through life's darkest moments with them. On my first day of work, I sat down with a student as his mother called to say that his father had died. I spent nights in the ER with people after failed suicide attempts, calmed anxious students as they underwent surgery and their parents were states away, journeyed alongside a student through her battle with extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, and in my last year, waded through the unexpected waters of grief when one of my students was killed unexpectedly in a hit and run while riding his bicycle. That job stretched me in ways I never saw coming. It was yet another way, even though we didn't know it, that Kelsey and I flung ourselves into the unknown. We had no idea what would happen when we moved into a college dorm to be present to the people who lived in that building. I just thought that I'd be building relationships with college students and talking with them at coffee shops and having fun conversations. but it was so much more than I could have imagined. I had no idea what God was doing in our lives when we moved into Alexander Hall, but I'm so glad he did. I went to Truett to get my Master's of Divinity in Spiritual Formation, and so I took as many electives as I could in that, and I loved learning from Dr. Reed, who was a great professor. One of the required classes for everyone's degree, though, was a class called Christian World Mission, and I had no idea how much that class would change the trajectory of my life. I went into class that first day not really knowing what to expect. I had, after all, been very passionate about missions as a high schooler, but I had since turned my gaze elsewhere. The professor, Dr. Stroop, had a way about him. He was kind, caring, and attentive to everyone. He was clearly intelligent and accomplished, but unlike some people who are professors, wasn't really all that interested in talking about himself or what he had done. He was interested in who was in the room with him. And as the class progressed, I knew that this was a person I needed to learn from, to study under and get to know. I took as many of his classes as I could, and he became a great mentor and friend. I learned so much from him, and I'm grateful that God placed him in my life. At my orientation, another professor joked about him and said, "Be careful standing next to this guy. You'll end up on the other side of the world." And that professor who cracked that joke wasn't lying. My degree required an internship, and for mine, I ended up interning under Pastor Niels Erik Nielsen at the First International Baptist Church of Copenhagen during the summer of 2015. It was another leap into the unknown, and I found the opportunity after Google searching ways to work at churches in Finland, because that sounded fun. Denmark isn't Finland, but it's close enough, I guess. That summer was full of incredible experiences and people that unfortunately I can't detail right now, but one of my favorite moments from that summer was serving communion. And it was an international church, which means that it's a church that draws people together from countries all over the world and lots of different ethnicities and language groups for the purpose of worship in a common language. FIBC meets in English because more people know English than Danish, which is not surprising. And one day I was serving communion at church. And at this church, people came up to the front to receive their piece of bread from the pastors and the deacons serving that day. And as people from literally all over the world came to receive pieces of bread, I began to realize just how truly global and universal God's love is and Jesus' work and death on the cross is. I saw firsthand the complete and total nature of God's love for the entire world. And it was one of the most remarkable experiences I had during that time. I'm so thankful for all of the things I was able to learn and experience while I was at Truett. I got to live in a monastery in the desert of New Mexico for a week with Benedictine monks. I got to travel to London to see ways that Christians there are working to be bold and creative and engaging in the ways that they're trying to reach their increasingly secular and pluralistic city. It awakened a passion in me for people who exist outside the church, and I want to dream of ways to engage them and our changing culture. I made lifelong friends who challenge me and love me and support me. The greatest gift of all from that time would have to be our daughter, Evelyn. She was born in December of 2016 and has brought so much joy to our lives. She really keeps us moving, especially now that she's walking, and I can't wait to see what her journey of faith is like and where God takes her. As seminary came to a close, it came time to discern next steps and apply for jobs at churches and ministries. It was a very difficult process full of unknowns. We ran down countless options and opportunities and possibilities. We seriously considered moving to Denmark to serve there, to Los Angeles for a PhD program, and to countless places all over the country. Eventually, a posting for Brewster Baptist came my way, once again thanks to the internet. I applied, and the more I talked to people from BBC and the more I learned about this place, the more right I felt that it was. It was a thrill to finally accept the offer when it came. It has definitely been a journey into the unknown. We know that God has brought us here, but we don't, and I don't know if we will anytime soon know what he has in store for us in this place and at this time. Some days are hard. We miss our family and our friends and the abundance of taco trucks we got used to in Texas. On the hard days, we look back and remember that the God who led us through all of those unknowns in our life is the God who is leading us now and is with us now. He walks beside us just like he always has. Our job is to be like Abraham or the disciples and leave our known places behind, leave our nets behind, and follow Jesus. All of our lives have and will have journeys off into the unknown. None of us know where our lives are heading, but we do know that God has promised to be with us, and he asks us, like the disciples and like Abraham, to follow him and is leading into the unknown. And I hope that you will follow on the adventure that God has for you. Please pray with me. Holy God, we thank you that you are the God who walks beside us, that you lead us on all the journeys of life, and that you are never far away. Please help us turn to you in the moments when the journey into the unknown becomes frightening or scary or anxiety-inducing. And please be with us now as we continue to worship through singing and through the giving of our tithes and offerings. Bless the money that is given and help it be used in ways that further your kingdom. In your name we pray. Amen.